By the way, right now, the Iranian TV is playing Tucker's show across Iran. The Muslim Brotherhood is tweeting out Tucker's show. They have decided he is the most effective spokesperson for their message, which is that America is the great Satan. And I will say one thing also that this room should do is follow the money. I don't believe all of these voices who have suddenly discovered that Israel is the source of all evil, that everything bad in the world was done by the Jews, that America is controlled by the Jews, and that radical Islamic terrorists are really nice, wonderful people. I don't think these people just arrived on this view organically and magically. I think many of them are being paid, and they're being paid millions of dollars. Look, it was about a decade ago that antisemitism began rising as a serious force on the left. And you saw leaders of the Democrat Party essentially look away and hope that it would go away. It didn't. It rose up, and today it has all but consumed the modern Democrat Party. It is not hyperbole to say there is a real and cognizable pro-Hamas contingent in today's Democrat Party. And that is not every elected Democrat, but almost every single elected Democrat is terrified of the pro-Hamas contingent in their party. And to see that, one only needs to look at the parade of so-called mainstream Democrats who went up to Manhattan to genuflect to Comrade Mondami to see that every one of them, the energy, the passion, the money in the Democrat Party is all with the crazies who hate Israel and embrace the terrorists who want to kill us. Now, as an elected Republican, criticizing the opposing party is not a difficult thing to do. I may have done so once or twice in my career. But we have an even greater obligation when it comes to our own party. And I will say on the right, I have seen more anti-Semitism in the last 18 months on the right than at any point in my lifetime. A year and a half ago, I could not have imagined we would be here having this conversation. And it is growing, and it is gaining real purchase, especially with young people. I agree, Norm, that we're winning with folks in this room with some gray or salt and pepper in their hair. But in a college classroom, I'm a lot less certain. And it is being spread by loud voices, the most consequential of whom is Tucker Carlson. I believe Tucker Carlson is the single most dangerous demagogue in this country. And I'll tell you, I've made the decision that I'm going to take him on head directly. If you look at the dissent of Tucker Carlson, and they're all the sort of lesser chattering voices that are moons circling his twisted planet. But if you look at the dissent, it started about a year and a half ago with platforming crackpot professors seeking to rewrite history about World War II. So he has one idiot whom he describes as the most consequential popular historian in the country, who leans forward and intones that Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II. He then finds another crackpot professor who says there's a good argument that America should have sided with the Nazis in Germany in World War II. And for all of this, Tucker gazes adoringly. By the way, no, there is not. Winston Churchill was an extraordinary historical figure. There's a reason Churchill's bust is on my mantle. If you come to my office, on the mantle, there are 3 busts, one of Churchill, one of Reagan, and one of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. 3 extraordinary leaders who had vision. But it's not just there. It then descends. Look, Nick Fuentes. It's actually interesting if you look at Republican politicians. Nick Fuentes is easy to denounce. And I actually think it's a tell among a Republican politician if they'll denounce Fuentes but are scared to say Tucker's name. That tells you a great deal. Nick Fuentes is a goose-stepping Nazi. And by the way, I'm not one who throws around the term Nazi loosely. But when Nick Fuentes says Hitler was very, very cool, I like Hitler and I agree with Hitler. Like, when you say you agree with Hitler, you are a Nazi. Tucker has Fuentes on his show. Doesn't question him about any of the ridiculous things he said. Doesn't react at all when Fuentes tells him his mission is to combat global Jewry. And Tucker nods, interesting. Fuentes tells him every year he celebrates Stalin's birthday. By the way, what kind of freak even knows Stalin's birthday? I don't know it, and I don't care to know it. But Tucker just coos when he says that. Listen, I believe we are facing an existential crisis. Why? Because anti-Semitism is a gateway to anti-capitalism and anti-Americanism. It doesn't end there. It is a bigotry and it is wrong, but it leads to an entire worldview. that is profoundly pernicious. Mondami is a great example of that, the Green-Red Alliance, where the Marxists and jihadists converge because they hate the same people. And I'll give you a hint, it would be us. And to be clear, Tucker was explicit. He said there is no one on planet Earth he hates more than Christian Zionists. And he named in particular me and Mike Huckabee as the objects of his ire, and I wear that as a badge of honor. Let me say, by the way, when Mike Huckabee went recently on Tucker's show, I thought he did a masterful job. I thought his tone and temperament were spectacular, and I thought he was an adult who picked up Tucker, put him over his knee, and spanked his bottom. Although if he had done that literally, Tucker might have enjoyed it. The descent to anti-capitalism and to anti-Americanism actually Tucker illustrates as well. Tucker doesn't just attack Israel and Jews, but he also did another show praising Nicolas Maduro. Why? Because he says, well, Maduro doesn't like homosexuals. He argued if we take out Maduro, it's because we want gay marriage in Venezuela. Like, what a weird, stupid theory. Maduro is a Marxist who hates America and a narco-trafficker. But at the same time, you are seeing with Tucker, and this is spreading throughout the rest of this ecosystem, a praise of the Islamists. So Tucker has the president of Iran on his show, doesn't question him about the fact that Iran at that time was actively trying to murder President Donald Trump, but instead sits there all but rubbing his knee beneath the table. Look, we are right now obviously in military conflict with Iran. And we're in military conflict with Iran because Iran has been the leading state sponsor of terrorism for 47 years. 90% of Hamas's funding comes from Iran. 90% of Hezbollah's funding comes from Iran. 90% of the Houthis' funding comes from Iran. Iran has murdered nearly 1,000 Americans. They have been waging war with us for half a century. And Tucker and the echo chamber around him are doing everything they can to undermine President Trump. Look, to their great frustration, Donald J. Trump is not an isolationist. They have tried. They have tried mightily, and Trump repeatedly has rejected their counsel. In his first term, President Trump took out General Soleimani. He took out al-Baghdadi. He utterly decimated ISIS. In his second term, he bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. He took out Maduro, and he is now taking out, among others, the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah, good news, he got to meet his 72 virgins. The bad news is all of them are Nick Fuentes. By the way, laughing at the bastards who hate us is one of the best weapons we have. But our national security policy has not gone down the isolationist line yet, because Trump has rejected that line. But this is a battle that is a concerted effort. It is a concerted effort to change foreign policy and to change American politics. We are seeing a concerted effort. It began with trying to rewrite history and rewrite World War II. And the objective there is to say the Holocaust was a lie. Jews were not mistreated. One of those crackpot professors said, well, just Germany had a trouble dealing with the Jewish question. Really, is that how you put mass murder and genocide? Part of that effort also is to fundamentally change the Republican Party. And there is an effort right now to drive a wedge between evangelical Christians and Israel. It's fitting that we're in the Museum of the Bible. It is not complicated that over the last 50 years, the strongest constituency in America for supporting Israel has been evangelical Christians. And there is a very deliberate effort, number one, to push replacement theology, which I believe is a heresy. I think it is non-biblical. Tucker is pushing it aggressively to say the promises that God gave to the people of Israel in the Old Testament, those promises are no longer valid. Every reference to Israel, every reference to the chosen people, the Jews are no longer the chosen people. Instead, Christians have replaced Israel, and the promises to the chosen people are now broken and abrogated. Look, I don't believe God breaks promises, but I will tell you, I also believe the Christian church is asleep. You know, I was visiting with a good friend who's a pastor, very well-respected pastor, who's in his 80s, and this was over Christmas. He was at Christmas party at my house, and he looked at me and said, Ted, what are you talking about? I don't see any anti-Semitism on the right. And there are a whole lot of pastors right now. This is a pastor you know very well, Dan. There are a whole lot of pastors right now who are looking around saying, things are great. Look, we're standing with Israel more than we ever have. We have reason to celebrate. What's the problem? And you know what? They're not online. They're not on Twitter. And what is dangerous is this is catching resonance with young people. If you want a barometer for how much so, go to last year. There were two events that were back-to-back, two turning point events. There was one turning point event that J.D. Vance was at Ole Miss, where a kid gets up and asks this wildly anti-Israel question. And what happened next was extraordinarily revealing. A third of the students burst into applause. That was their immediate reaction to that question. A week later, Eric and Laura Trump are at another Turning Point event, this time at Auburn. An even more wildly anti-Israel question gets asked, full of false statements, and the reaction is identical. Instantaneously, a third of the students burst into applause. And let me be clear, this is not Berkeley or Yale. This is Ole Miss and Auburn. These are a bunch of frat guys looking to get lucky on Saturday night. But the problem is we live in a very polarized and tribalized society. And I worry about the 19-year-old who's saying, oh, that's what our team believes. That's who we are. Let's be clear. If you are a young, ambitious Democrat, it is obvious what you should do. You should be viciously anti-Israel. You should be out there dancing free, free Palestine. You should be the idiot in New York giving a speech how we welcome everyone and want everyone here, even as a terrorist throws an incendiary bomb over your head, trying to murder you and everyone standing around you. That's the path for success in the Democrat Party. The exception that proves the rule, by the way, is John Fetterman. John Fetterman has shown enormous courage, and his colleagues hate him for it. But what I worry about is in a few years, that could be the path to succeed on the right. And I don't want to wake up in 5 years and find myself in a country where both major political parties are unambiguously anti-Israel and unapologetically anti-Semitic. And I think that is a real possibility. If Tucker and his minions prevail, that will happen. And so, look, around this room are thought leaders, are people who put an effort and energy and money to work. And I want to call on all of you, to urge all of you, fight this battle on every front. Fight it on the historical revisionism. Fight it on the foreign policy. Look, on foreign policy, one of the great lines you see all the time is, we are fighting against Iran for Israel. I'm not going to lose my kids for Israel. Let me be clear. We are not bombing Iran for Israel. We are bombing Iran for America. And we need to make the case unambiguously why it is in the interest of the United States of America. There is a reason the Ayatollah called Israel the little Satan and America the great Satan. President Trump is being a strong commander-in-chief right now because he's defending America and stopping lunatics who want to murder us. We also need to fight it on the theological grounds. And I will say, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a theologian, but I think many pastors and theologians are unaware of what is happening, that if you look at the polling among young evangelicals, among teenagers and 20-something, the numbers are turning sharply against Israel. They are hearing this messaging, and right now there's very little counter to it. How many pastors do you know that are preaching right now on what the Bible says about Israel, that are taking on replacement theology and saying why it's a lie? I can count on one hand the number of pastors I know that are doing that. They're not aware this battle is being waged. We need to fight and engage it and take on the core premises, because if we lose the next generation, we lose the country. Look, at the very beginning of National Review, Buckley had a moment where he said no to the anti-Semites. They're not welcome in our party, and that changed the course of history for decades. We're at a moment that, if anything, is more consequential now. And I will tell you, there are costs to this. So virtually every single one of my colleagues in the Senate on the Republican side agrees with me and has said, you're absolutely right, thank you for taking this on, and yet almost none of them will say Tucker's name, because there is a cost. I could tweet this morning, good morning, and hundreds of anti-Semitic responses would immediately fill my social media. Turns out I've seen many times an image of myself in a bikini with the flag of Israel. I never knew that I looked quite fetching in a bikini. And I will say there is virtue. One of the things, look, there are many lessons one can learn from President Trump, but one of the lessons is just to not give a damn. There is a power to fearlessness. There is a power to speaking the truth and letting the idiots say what they will. And I just want to encourage the men and women here. The fact that this room is persuaded does not mean that the college campus is. It does not mean that the Capitol Hill interns are. It does not mean that the interns at Heritage and CPI and every other conservative institution in this country, that they're persuaded. Understand that this has been an operation with money behind it. Qatar is spending real money. By the way, Tucker also now is a Qatari real estate owner. He's purchased a home in Qatar. He's literally become a vocal proponent of Islamists. And by the way, to show you just how anti-Semitism leads to anti-Americanism, what is Tucker saying this week? He's saying Donald Trump has called for unconditional surrender in Iran. When you surrender unconditionally, what it means is that soldiers can rape your wives and your daughters. And so if Iran surrenders to America, American soldiers will rape the women in Iran. That is a grotesque lie. And by the way, American soldiers have not done that in any war we have fought. And yet Tucker is willing to impugn the entire American military. And then he also says the other way to do it is we can drop nuclear weapons on Iran. And he says, I believe we're getting ready to nuke Iran. That gives you the sense. By the way, right now, the Iranian TV is playing Tucker's show across Iran. The Muslim Brotherhood is tweeting out Tucker's show. They have decided he is the most effective spokesperson for their message, which is that America is the great Satan. And I will say one thing also that this room should do is follow the money. I don't believe all of these voices who have suddenly discovered that Israel is the source of all evil, that everything bad in the world was done by the Jews, that America is controlled by the Jews, and that radical Islamic terrorists are really nice, wonderful people. I don't think these people just arrived on this view organically and magically. I think many of them are being paid, and they're being paid millions of dollars. If you look at a listing of foreign nations that send money to our universities, the number one foreign nation on that is Qatar, who sent $6.6 billion to our universities. If you want to know why we had anti-Semitic protests on our universities, I'm not the only one who noticed the tents all matched. This is an operation to destroy America. I think it's being paid for by Qatar, by China, by Russia. RT, the Russian site, also retweeted Tucker Carlson. But I think many of these influencers are cashing a check. People in this room could do an enormous service by documenting that. I don't have the evidence right now to prove it, but Occam's razor, the simplest explanation, is usually the right one. But we need to fight, and I'll tell you online, there are also active deceptions. There are millions of bots, and there are millions of what are called sock puppets. Sock puppets are real people who talk on other topics, but also deliberately amplify content that is false and bigoted. We need to be combating all of that. One of the steps we should do, by the way, is social media should identify what country the poster is coming from, because there are a great many foreign posters who pretend to be Americans to dissuade us. And so I'm honored to be here to say thank you to everyone here, but also to say this is not the end of a battle, the end of a campaign where we can celebrate we have won. This is rather the beginning of a battle where our nation, our beliefs, our Constitution, the principles that built America are under assault, and we need to gird ourselves for battle and get ready and defeat this garbage, because we are blessed to live at a time of consequence where we're not fighting over whether the top marginal tax rate is 37%. Or 39%. That matters, but the fate of the cosmos will not turn on that question. We are fighting over whether the greatest nation in the history of the universe will survive or go under. And we are blessed to have the opportunity to man the ramparts to defend America, and I'm proud to stand with each and every one of you to do that. Thank you.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this. You can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.